What if someone warned you about a disaster before it happened? Not a guess, not a coincidence. An exact prediction, down to the date, the location, the death toll. Now imagine that warning came from someone who claimed to be from the future. Sounds impossible, right? But what you're about to hear are 10 documented cases where mysterious strangers delivered chillingly accurate warnings about events that hadn't happened yet, and every single one came true. Let's begin. Number 10. The Osaka Earthquake Letter. What you're about to hear is one of the most chilling cases of an apparent warning from the future ever documented. Imagine receiving a letter that describes a catastrophe in perfect detail, the exact location, the precise death toll, the specific failures that would follow. Now, imagine that letter arrives 3 weeks before any of it happens. Impossible, right? And yet, according to accounts from Japanese municipal workers, that is exactly what occurred in the spring of 2011. On February 21st, 2011, a clerk at the Osaka Municipal Office received an unusual envelope. There was no return address, only a handwritten note on the front that read, "Urgent, please read before March." Inside was a single-typed letter, 3 pages long, written in formal Japanese. The sender identified himself only as a visitor from the year 2089. The clerk almost threw it away. Letters from supposed time travelers weren't exactly uncommon, especially in a country fascinated by science fiction. But something about the tone made her pause. It wasn't ranting or paranoid. It was calm, precise, almost clinical. The letter described a massive earthquake striking the northeastern coast of Japan, magnitude 9.0 or higher. It spoke of a tsunami wave taller than buildings sweeping inland and destroying everything in its path. It named specific prefectures that would be devastated, and then, in chilling detail, it described the failure of a nuclear power facility. The letter named Fukushima Daiichi directly. It warned of reactor meltdowns, radiation leaks, and contamination that would poison the land and water for generations. The death toll, according to the letter, would reach approximately 18,000 souls. The clerk filed it under miscellaneous correspondence and forgot about it entirely. 3 weeks later, on March 11th, 2011, the Tohoku earthquake struck, magnitude 9.1. The tsunami that followed killed nearly 20,000 people and triggered the worst nuclear disaster since Chernobyl. Everything the letter described came true with horrifying accuracy. After the disaster, as officials scrambled to understand what had happened, someone remembered the strange letter. It was retrieved from the archives and examined closely for the first time. Investigators were stunned. The details weren't vague predictions that could apply to any earthquake. They were specific, naming locations, describing the nuclear crisis before it began, estimating casualties with near-perfect precision. How could anyone have known? The earthquake was caused by tectonic forces that had been building for centuries. No scientific model predicted the exact date or magnitude. And yet this letter, mailed weeks in advance, described it all. Postal investigators attempted to trace the envelope's origin, but hit dead ends immediately. The return address didn't exist. No cameras captured anyone mailing it. The paper stock was unusual, containing synthetic polymer fibers that forensic analysts said weren't commercially available anywhere in the world. The ink was equally strange, a composition that didn't match any known manufacturer. It was as if the letter itself had come from somewhere else entirely. Perhaps the most haunting detail was the letter's final paragraph. The sender wrote that this was not the first warning he had attempted to send. "We have tried to warn others before," the letter stated. "They never listen in time. History resists change, but we keep trying. Perhaps one day, one of these letters will arrive early enough to matter." The implication was staggering. Whoever wrote this letter believed they had sent warnings before, possibly about other disasters, possibly across different points in time. And every time, the warnings were ignored. To this day, the letter remains in a secure government archive. Officials have refused to release it publicly, citing concerns about causing panic or inspiring hoaxes. But those who have seen it describe the same reaction, a deep unease that lingers long after reading. The precision is too perfect. The details are too accurate. Coincidence simply doesn't explain it. So, what do we make of this? Was the letter a genuine transmission from someone who had witnessed the aftermath of the disaster from decades in the future? Or is there another explanation that somehow makes more sense? And if warnings like this are being sent backward through time, how many others have arrived at government offices around the world, been dismissed as nonsense, and filed away while the disasters they predicted unfolded exactly as described? Absolutely chilling. And trust me, this is only the beginning. The cases ahead are even more intense. Number 9, the Berlin banker's confession. This case is so strange that when you hear it, you'll probably have to pause and ask yourself whether something like this could actually happen. Imagine walking into a police station and confessing to witnessing a crime that hasn't occurred yet. Not predicting it, not guessing, but describing it as if you had already lived through it. Now imagine that 2 years later, every single detail of your confession comes true exactly as you described. That is the bizarre story of Erich Holzmann, a West German banker who seemingly remembered the future. In the autumn of 1987, Holzmann was a respected financial advisor living in West Berlin. He was 52 years old, well-dressed, articulate, and had no history of mental illness or erratic behavior. His colleagues described him as calm and methodical, the last person anyone would expect to walk into a police station with a fantastical story. But on the evening of October 14, 1987, that is exactly what he did. Holzmann approached the front desk and told the officer on duty that he needed to report something he had witnessed. When asked what crime he was reporting, Holzmann said it hadn't happened yet. The officers were understandably confused, but Holzmann spoke with such conviction that they decided to hear him out. What he described left them speechless. He spoke of the Berlin Wall opening. He described massive crowds gathering at the checkpoints, people streaming through from east to west, strangers embracing in the streets. He described guards stepping aside, confused and overwhelmed, unsure whether to enforce orders that no longer seemed to matter. He gave a specific date for all of this, November 9th, 1989. And then he mentioned something peculiar, a confused announcement on television that would trigger the whole event.
Das tritt nach meiner Kenntnis ist das sofort. Unverzüglich.
A spokesman saying something he didn't fully understand, and the city erupting in response. The officers exchanged glances. The Berlin Wall had stood for over 25 years. The idea that it would simply open, that crowds would walk through without resistance, seemed like the fantasy of a madman. They filed a report, marked it for psychiatric evaluation, and released Holzmann with instructions to seek professional help. He thanked them politely and left. Most people would have forgotten the whole incident within a week, but what happened next ensured that no one involved would ever forget. On November 9th, 1989, exactly 2 years after Holzmann's confession, the Berlin Wall fell. It happened almost precisely as he had described. A government spokesman named Günter Schabowski gave a rambling, confused press conference in which he mistakenly announced that travel restrictions were being lifted immediately.
Unverzüglich.
Within hours, thousands of people gathered at the checkpoints. The guards, receiving no clear orders, eventually stepped aside. The world watched in disbelief as East and West Germans embraced in the streets, dancing on the wall that had divided them for nearly 3 decades. After reunification, journalists investigating strange stories from the Cold War era stumbled upon the original police report. They tracked down the officers who had taken Holzmann's statement. Both confirmed the story. They remembered him clearly because his prediction had been so specific and so absurd at the time. But when they tried to find Holzmann himself, they discovered something disturbing. He had vanished in early 1989, months before his prediction came true. There was no death certificate, no forwarding address, no trace of where he had gone. Colleagues who worked with Holzmann in his final months reported that he had become increasingly strange. He spoke of having been somewhere else, of carrying memories that didn't belong to his life. His apartment, when finally examined, contained journals filled with dates and descriptions of events, some in the past, many still in the future. Several of those future predictions allegedly came true in subsequent years. The journals were reportedly confiscated by German intelligence services and have never been publicly released. So, what happened to Erich Holzmann? How did a respected banker know the exact date and circumstances of one of the most important events in modern history, 2 years before it occurred? Was he somehow receiving information from his own future? Had he actually lived through those events and been sent backward in time? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all, where did he disappear to in 1989? And is he still out there somewhere, carrying memories of things that haven't happened yet? Truly fascinating. And this is nothing compared to what comes next. Number 8. The voicemail from 2037. This case is absolutely mind-bending, and once you hear it, you'll understand why it continues to haunt everyone who learns about it. Imagine picking up your phone and finding a voicemail from someone claiming to be your daughter. The voice is warm, familiar somehow, filled with desperate urgency. She calls you dad. She begs you not to take a specific flight on a specific date. There's just one problem. You don't have a daughter, you're not even married, and yet, months later, that exact flight crashes and kills everyone on board. This is the terrifying story of Marcus Chen and the voicemail that saved his life. In September 20, Marcus Chen was a 34-year-old software engineer living in Austin, Texas. He was single, focused on his career, and had no children. His life was ordinary, predictable, and entirely unremarkable. That changed on the evening of September 17th, when he noticed a voicemail notification on his landline phone. He rarely used the landline anymore, kept it mostly for emergencies and occasional calls from older relatives. The message was 47 seconds long. What he heard when he played it made his blood run cold. The voice belonged to a young woman, probably in her 20s. She spoke calmly at first, but her words carried an unmistakable weight of desperation. "Dad, please listen to me carefully," she said. "I know you don't understand this. I know none of this makes sense right now. But you cannot board Flight 2477 on March 15th, 2020. Please, Dad, I'm calling from 2037. You have to live. Everything depends on you being alive." There was a pause, a shaky breath, and then the message ended. Marcus played it again and again. The voice called him Dad with such familiarity, such love, that it made his chest tighten, even though he had no idea who she was. His first assumption was a wrong number, some confused woman calling the wrong person about some other flight. But she had specifically said Dad. She had given a precise date and flight number, and there was something in her voice, a quality he couldn't quite identify, that made him feel like she genuinely knew him. He saved the message and tried to forget about it. Months passed. Life continued. But the voicemail stayed in the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't remove. March 2020 arrived. Marcus had a business trip scheduled, a client meeting in Denver that he had been planning for weeks. He pulled up his itinerary and felt his stomach drop. His flight was scheduled for March 15th. Flight 2477, the exact flight and date from the voicemail. For a long moment, he just stared at the screen. His rational mind screamed that this was coincidence, that voicemails from the future were impossible, that he was being absurd. But the voice of that woman echoed in his memory. The way she said Dad, the desperation in her breath. He canceled the ticket that night. On March 15th, 2020, Flight 2477 departed on schedule. 40 minutes into the journey, it encountered severe mechanical failure over mountainous terrain. The plane went down in a remote canyon. All 94 passengers and crew perished. There were no survivors. Marcus Chen watched the news coverage in stunned silence, his hands trembling. He would have been on that plane. He should have been on that plane. In the weeks that followed, Marcus had the voicemail professionally analyzed. Audio forensics experts confirmed there were no signs of editing or manipulation. The recording was genuine, but the truly inexplicable detail came from the metadata analysis. The call had originated from his own home phone number, except no outgoing call had been made from his line at that time. The phone company confirmed it. The call came from nowhere, or perhaps more accurately, from somewhen. 4 years later, Marcus married a woman named Sophia. In 24, they welcomed a daughter. They named her Elena, the name the voice in the voicemail had whispered just before hanging up. Elena is a toddler now, happy and completely unaware of the message that bears her name. Marcus still has the voicemail. He plays it sometimes late at night when he's alone. A daughter who doesn't exist yet, calling from a future that may never come to pass, warning her father about a death he narrowly escaped. Did that call create a paradox? Did it erase the very future it came from? The questions are endless, and the answers remain impossibly out of reach. Number 7, the pandemic prophet of Manila. Before we continue, here's a quick question for you. If someone on the street warned you about a global disaster that hadn't happened yet, would you stop and listen? Or would you walk right past like everyone else? Now, imagine that person turned out to be completely right about everything. That is the deeply unsettling story of a mysterious street preacher who appeared in the Philippines just weeks before the world changed forever. A man who described the coming pandemic with impossible accuracy and then vanished without a trace. In November 29, the bustling Quiapo district of Manila was filled with its usual chaos. Street vendors shouted over each other, jeepneys crawled through gridlocked traffic, and crowds pushed through narrow sidewalks on their way to the famous Black Nazarene Church. Among them, a strange figure began appearing each afternoon. He was a thin man, perhaps in his 50s, wearing simple clothes that looked slightly out of place. He carried no signs, no religious pamphlets, nothing except a small metallic object he kept clutched in his left hand. Locals who noticed him said he called himself Brother Elias. Unlike the usual street preachers who quoted scripture and warned of spiritual judgment, Brother Elias spoke of something far more specific. He warned of a sickness coming from the east, a plague that would close the entire world. He described it in vivid detail that made passersby stop momentarily before shaking their heads and moving on. He spoke of governments forbidding human touch, of streets emptying for months at a time, of hospitals overwhelmed with the dying. He said masks would cover every face and that the economy would freeze like a stopped clock. People laughed at him. Some tossed coins. Most ignored him completely. A local news crew looking for quirky human interest content filmed Brother Elias one afternoon in late November. The footage shows him standing on a concrete barrier, speaking to a crowd that barely acknowledges his presence. His voice is calm but carries an undercurrent of profound sadness. "The sickness will come before the new year is old," he says in the video. "Millions will die. The world will learn what it means to be truly alone." The crew used a few seconds of the footage in a segment about eccentric Manila characters. Then they archived the rest and forgot about it. Weeks later, reports began emerging from Wuhan, China, about a mysterious respiratory illness. By January 20, the World Health Organization had named it. By March, the entire planet was in lockdown. Everything Brother Elias had described was happening exactly as he said it would. Governments enforced social distancing, streets emptied, hospitals overflowed, masks became mandatory worldwide. The footage of Brother Elias resurfaced in April 20 and spread across Filipino social media like wildfire. People who had walked past him just months earlier now watched his words with chills running down their spines. But when journalists and curious citizens tried to find Brother Elias, he was gone. No one had seen him since early January. He had no known address, no identification, no digital footprint of any kind. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist the moment his warning was no longer needed. Witnesses who had spoken with him recalled strange details. One woman said he had told her specifically that her grandchildren would survive the pandemic, but that not everyone in her family would. She lost her mother to COVID-19 in 2021. Her grandchildren remain healthy today. Others remembered the metallic object he always carried. When asked about it, Brother Elias reportedly called it his anchor. He never explained what that meant. Some who saw it described it as resembling a thick coin or medallion with unusual symbols etched into its surface. It glowed faintly, according to one vendor who got close enough to see. Theories about Brother Elias range from divine messenger to time traveler to elaborate performance artist. But no theory explains how he knew so many specific details about an event that hadn't occurred yet. The footage of Brother Elias is still available online if you search for it. A thin man in simple clothes, shouting warnings to crowds who couldn't be bothered to stop. He knew exactly what was coming. He tried to tell everyone who would listen, and when the plague finally arrived, he was already gone, leaving behind nothing but a handful of videos and a question that haunts everyone who watches them. Who was Brother Elias, and how did he know? Number 6, the Chernobyl mathematician. This case is so disturbing that even decades later, people who know about it refuse to discuss it publicly. Imagine receiving a document that mathematically proves a nuclear reactor is about to explode. The equations are precise, the predictions specific, the timeline exact. You have 72 hours to act, but instead of sounding the alarm, you dismiss it as the work of a lunatic and file it away. 3 days later, the worst nuclear disaster in history unfolds exactly as the document described. This is the haunting story of an anonymous warning that could have saved Chernobyl and the mysterious mathematician who sent it. On April 23, 1986, a clerk at the Soviet Ministry of Energy office in Kyiv received an unusual delivery. It was a thick manila envelope with no return address, containing approximately 15 pages of dense mathematical calculations. The equations dealt with nuclear physics, specifically the behavior of reactor cores under extreme conditions. Attached to the front was a single-typed page summarizing the contents in plain language. It stated that reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant would experience catastrophic failure within 72 hours. The document named the specific failure mechanism, something called a positive void coefficient, which would trigger an uncontrollable chain reaction. It predicted explosions, fires, and radiation contamination that would spread across Europe. The clerk passed the document to her supervisor, who glanced at it briefly and laughed. The Soviet nuclear program was the pride of the nation. The idea that one of their reactors could fail so spectacularly seemed absurd. The document was marked as probable disinformation, possibly the work of a disgruntled scientist or Western provocateur attempting to spread fear. It was filed in a cabinet and forgotten. No one contacted Chernobyl. No one ordered additional safety checks. No one did anything at all. 71 hours later, in the early morning of April 26, 1986, Reactor 4 exploded. The blast tore through the building's roof and sent a plume of radioactive material into the atmosphere. Firefighters who responded had no idea they were walking into lethal radiation zones. 31 people died within weeks. Hundreds of thousands were eventually displaced. The contamination spread across Belarus, Ukraine, and into Western Europe. It remains the worst nuclear accident in human history. In the chaotic aftermath, as Soviet officials scrambled to contain both the disaster and the information about it, someone remembered the anonymous document. It was retrieved from the archives and examined by nuclear physicists for the first time. They were stunned into silence. The mathematics was not only correct, but extraordinarily sophisticated. It used notation and theoretical frameworks that were unfamiliar to Soviet scientists at the time. Some of the concepts wouldn't appear in mainstream physics journals until years later. Whoever wrote this document possessed knowledge that seemed to exceed what was scientifically available in 1986. Forensic analysis of the paper revealed additional mysteries. The stock contained synthetic fibers that were inconsistent with standard Soviet manufacturing. The ink composition was unusual, almost impossible to source commercially, and there was one final detail that made investigators deeply uneasy. At the bottom of the last page, handwritten in neat Cyrillic script, was a single sentence. "This is your only warning. The second reactor will not give you one." The implications of that sentence sparked quiet debates within classified Soviet scientific circles for years. What did it mean by the second reactor? Was there another disaster coming? Some researchers connected it to Fukushima when that plant failed in 2011, but the link remains speculative. Others believe the warning referred to something that hasn't happened yet, a future catastrophe that the mysterious sender knew about but couldn't prevent. The document itself has reportedly been buried in post-Soviet archives, scattered across bureaucracies that no longer exist. But those who claim to have seen copies describe the same reaction: a profound sense of dread at the precision of the predictions and the tragedy of their dismissal. Someone tried to stop Chernobyl. Someone sent proof of exactly what would happen and exactly when. And the only response was a bureaucrat's laughter and a filing cabinet. Who was the Chernobyl mathematician? Where did they obtain knowledge that exceeded contemporary science? And if they truly came from the future, why couldn't they find a way to make anyone listen? The answers remain buried in radioactive soil. And somewhere, perhaps, a second warning is still waiting to be found. Number 5. The September 10th caller. What you're about to hear is one of the most disturbing cases ever connected to alleged time travel, and it involves the darkest day in modern American history. Imagine working at an FBI tip line on an ordinary Monday night. The phone rings. A calm male voice on the other end describes a terrorist attack in precise detail. He names the targets, the method, the approximate casualties. He says he's calling from 37 years in the future. You log the call as non-credible and move on with your shift. The next morning, you watch everything he described unfold on live television. This is the chilling story of a warning that came one night too late to matter. On September 10th dawn and at approximately 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time, the FBI's public tip line received an unusual call. The male voice on the recording was calm, measured, almost emotionless. There was no panic in his tone, no urgency that might suggest someone reporting an imminent threat. He spoke like a man reading from a script he had memorized long ago. He described an attack on New York City and Washington, D.C. that would occur the following morning. He specifically named the World Trade Center towers as targets. He mentioned the Pentagon, and he described the method with horrifying accuracy. Commercial aircraft would be hijacked and deliberately crashed into the buildings. The operator who took the call followed standard protocol. She asked clarifying questions, trying to assess whether the caller had credible information. His responses were strange. He didn't claim to have inside knowledge of a terrorist cell. He didn't name conspirators or provide actionable intelligence. Instead, he simply said, "I am calling from 37 years ahead of your time. You will not believe me, but I had to try." The caller sounded too calm, too rehearsed, as if he already knew nothing would come of his warning. The call ended after approximately 3 minutes. Life continued normally for a few more hours. The next morning, September 11th, 2001, the world watched in horror as 2 hijacked planes struck the Twin Towers. A third hit the Pentagon. A fourth crashed in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 people died. The caller's predictions had been devastatingly accurate in every detail. In the chaos that followed, the tip-line recording was flagged for review. Investigators listened to it with growing unease. The caller had described the second tower falling before the first, a detail that seemed counterintuitive but matched exactly what occurred. He had also mentioned that the wars following the attack would last 20 years. At the time, that seemed like an exaggeration. 2 decades later, American forces were still engaged in Afghanistan. The recording was archived and eventually surfaced years later in response to Freedom of Information Act requests, though heavily redacted. Voice analysis proved inconclusive. The caller matched no known individual in any database. His phone number traced to a payphone in rural Nevada, but there was no surveillance footage from that location. No witnesses who remembered seeing anyone make a late-night call. It was as if the caller had materialized just long enough to deliver his message and then vanished. Perhaps the most haunting moment in the recording comes near the end. After describing the attacks, the caller pauses for several seconds. When he speaks again, his voice carries a weight of profound exhaustion. "I have made this call before," he says quietly. "It never changes anything, but I keep trying." The implication is staggering. If taken at face value, the caller wasn't just a time traveler. He was someone trapped in a loop, making the same desperate call across multiple timelines, watching the same tragedy unfold again and again despite his efforts. The recording exists in a government archive somewhere, classified and largely forgotten, except by researchers who study unexplained phenomena. A voice from what claims to be the future, describing the worst attack on American soil hours before it occurred. And the most haunting part isn't that no one believed him. It's that he didn't expect them to. He already knew the outcome before he picked up the phone. Some warnings, it seems, are destined to go unheard no matter how many times they're spoken. Absolutely chilling. And trust me, the next case will shake you even more. Number 4. The Chilean Mine Rescue Instructions. This case is unlike anything we've covered so far because it doesn't end in tragedy. It ends in a miracle, but the mystery behind that miracle is what makes this story so fascinating. Imagine 33 men trapped 700 meters beneath the earth, buried alive in a collapsed mine with dwindling oxygen and almost no hope of rescue. Engineers on the surface calculate that saving them could take months if it's even possible at all. Then, an anonymous package arrives containing detailed schematics for a rescue device that doesn't exist yet. A device that will save every single life. This is the incredible story of the Chilean mine rescue and the impossible blueprints that made it happen. On August 5th, 2010, the San Jose copper gold mine in Chile's Atacama Desert collapsed without warning. Over 700,000 tons of rock crashed down through the main access tunnel, sealing 33 miners in a small emergency shelter deep underground. The men had limited food, contaminated water, and air that was growing thinner by the hour. Rescue teams arrived immediately, but the scale of the disaster was overwhelming. Initial assessments suggested drilling a rescue shaft could take 3 to 4 months. Many privately doubted the miners would survive that long. For 17 agonizing days, no one even knew if the men were still alive. Then a small drill probe broke through to the shelter, and a note was attached to the returning equipment. Estamos bien en el refugio, los 33. We are fine in the shelter, all 33. The world erupted in celebration. They were alive. But the challenge of bringing them to the surface remained almost insurmountable. The rock was unstable. Traditional drilling methods were too slow. Engineers debated options that all seemed inadequate. Hope was fading, even as the miners clung to life below. Then, on August 12th, exactly 1 week after the collapse, an anonymous package arrived at the Rescue Command Center. Inside was a thick folder containing detailed technical drawings for a narrow-bore rescue capsule, unlike anything Chilean engineers had seen before. The design was elegant, innovative, and addressed every specific challenge of the San Jose rescue. It accounted for the shaft diameter, the rock composition, the depth, even the psychological needs of men who would be pulled through hundreds of meters of darkness in a tube barely wider than their shoulders. There was no return address, no sender identification, no letter explaining where the plans came from. Initially, rescue coordinators dismissed the package as the work of a well-meaning amateur. But as professional engineers examined the schematics more closely, their skepticism turned to astonishment. The design incorporated solutions they hadn't considered. The specifications called for materials and manufacturing techniques that were at the cutting edge of what was possible. Some elements referenced alloys and fabrication methods that engineers later said weren't standard in 2010 at all. Desperate for any viable option, the team decided to adapt the anonymous designs. Working around the clock, they built a capsule they named Phoenix, the Phoenix. On October 13, 2010, after 69 days underground, the first miner ascended through the rescue shaft inside the Phoenix capsule. One by one, all 33 men were brought to the surface. Not a single life was lost. It was hailed as one of the greatest rescue operations in history, a triumph of human ingenuity and determination. But behind the celebration, questions lingered about those mysterious blueprints. Forensic investigators analyzed the package thoroughly. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, no traceable fibers. The paper stock was unusual, containing synthetic materials that analysts couldn't source to any known manufacturer. One page contained a handwritten note in Spanish that read simply, "They must survive. The 33 matter." What did that mean? Why did these specific miners matter so much that someone would send revolutionary technology from an unknown source to save them? Some researchers speculate that the plans came from the future, sent backward by someone who knew the original rescue attempt would fail. Others suggest the 33 survivors went on to influence events in ways we don't yet understand. The Phoenix capsule sits in a museum today, a symbol of hope and human resilience. Thousands of visitors admire it every year, unaware of the deeper mystery. Someone sent those plans. Someone knew exactly what was needed before anyone on the surface had figured it out. And whoever they were, they made certain that 33 men would live to see their families again. The question is simply this: who were they, and how did they know? Number 3, the assassination warning. What you're about to hear involves one of the most analyzed moments in American history, a tragedy that has spawned endless investigations, theories, and debates. But hidden within the mountain of documents and testimonies is a detail that most people have never heard. A letter that arrived weeks before the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, describing exactly what would happen, where it would happen, and how. A letter that was dismissed, filed away, and only rediscovered years later when it was far too late to matter. This is the story of a warning that could have changed history. On October 29, 1963, a plain envelope arrived at the Dallas Police Department headquarters. It bore no return address, only a postmark from somewhere in Texas. Inside was a single-typed letter, approximately 2 pages long, written in formal English with no spelling errors and no apparent emotional urgency. The content, however, was explosive. The letter stated plainly that President Kennedy would be shot during his upcoming visit to Dallas. It specified that the shooting would occur on November 2nd, that the shots would come from a high building near Dealey Plaza, and that a lone gunman would be blamed, even though, the letter suggested, others were involved who could not be stopped. The officer who opened the letter read it twice, then passed it to his supervisor. Presidential visits always generated a flood of threatening correspondence and paranoid warnings. This letter was filed alongside dozens of others, marked as probable crank mail and forgotten. No additional security measures were implemented. No investigation was launched. The machinery of history continued grinding toward its terrible destination. On November 10, 1963, President Kennedy's motorcade rolled through Dealey Plaza in Dallas. Shots rang out from the Texas School Book Depository, a high building overlooking the route. The president was struck twice and pronounced dead at Parkland Memorial Hospital. The nation plunged into mourning. A lone gunman, Lee Harvey Oswald, was arrested and blamed. Conspiracy theories about additional shooters and deeper plots began almost immediately and continue to this day. Everything the letter had described came true with chilling precision. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, someone at the Dallas Police Department remembered the October letter. A search was conducted, but in the chaos of the investigation, the document could not be located. It seemed lost to history, another footnote buried under the avalanche of evidence and speculation. Then, in 1978, during the investigation conducted by the House Select Committee on Assassinations, the letter resurfaced. It was found misfiled in an unrelated archive, preserved, by bureaucratic accident. Forensic analysts examined the document carefully. The paper was unusual, containing synthetic fibers that were inconsistent with standard 1963 manufacturing processes. The typewriter used to produce the letter could not be matched to any machine in Dallas police records or any known typewriter registry from that era. But the most disturbing detail was the letter's tone. It wasn't urgent or pleading. It read like someone describing an event they had already witnessed, resigned rather than desperate. One passage in particular haunted investigators. "We have tried to prevent this moment 7 times, it stated. It always happens. Some points in time cannot be moved." The implications of that sentence are staggering. If taken literally, it suggests that whoever wrote the letter had attempted to alter this specific historical event multiple times across multiple timelines and failed every time. It suggests that the assassination of President Kennedy might be what some theoretical physicists call a fixed point, an event so central to the structure of time that it resists all attempts at modification. Every timeline converges on the same terrible moment in Dealey Plaza. The letter remains in a classified archive, rarely discussed even among assassination researchers. It proves that someone knew. Someone tried to warn the world about one of history's most devastating moments. And the most chilling possibility isn't just that they were ignored. It's that being ignored might have been inevitable, that they had watched this exact scenario unfold again and again across different versions of history, always sending the warning, always being dismissed, always watching the motorcade turn onto Elm Street. Some tragedies, it seems, are written into the fabric of time itself, and no warning, no matter how accurate, can erase them. Number 2, the smartphone photo from 1942. This case is so visually striking that when you see the evidence, you will find yourself staring at it for minutes trying to find an explanation. Imagine discovering a photograph from World War II, a genuine artifact from the London Blitz, showing rubble, rescue workers, and terrified civilians amid the devastation of German bombing raids. Now imagine looking closer at that photograph and noticing something impossible in the background. A woman holding what appears to be a modern smartphone, its screen glowing faintly in her hands. A device that wouldn't be invented for another 65 years. This is the extraordinary story of a photograph that defies explanation. In 2019, a British antique dealer named Howard Marsden attended an estate sale in Kent, England. Among the items for auction was a battered World War II ammunition box, rusted and unremarkable. Marsden purchased it for a modest sum, intending to restore and resell it. When he examined the box at home, he discovered something unexpected. The bottom panel was slightly loose, concealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age, and never opened since it was placed there decades ago. Marsden carefully opened it and found a single photograph along with a handwritten note. The photograph was clearly from the Blitz era. It showed a London street in December 1940, ravaged by bombing. Rubble filled the roadway. Rescue workers in period clothing dug through collapsed buildings. Civilians stood in clusters, their faces marked by exhaustion and fear. The composition was unremarkable for wartime photography, exactly the kind of image that filled newspapers during those terrible months. But when Marsden looked closer at the background, he noticed something that made him catch his breath. Standing slightly apart from the main group was a woman in period-appropriate clothing, a dark coat and headscarf typical of 1940s fashion. But in her hands, held at chest level and angled toward her face, was a thin rectangular object with a glowing screen. The proportions were unmistakable to anyone living in the modern era. It was a smartphone. The shape, the size, the way light emanated from what appeared to be a display. Everything about it matched a device that wouldn't exist until 2007 at the earliest. Marsden had the photograph examined by multiple experts. Analysis of the paper's stock and chemical composition confirmed it was consistent with photography materials from the early 1940s. There were no signs of digital manipulation, no evidence of doctoring or double exposure. The image appeared to be exactly what it looked like. A genuine wartime photograph containing an object that simply should not exist in that era. The handwritten note found with the photograph only deepened the mystery. Written in neat cursive, it read, "She warned us where the bombs would fall. She saved our street. We don't know where she went." Researchers attempted to identify the street shown in the photograph and cross-reference it with Blitz bombing records. What they found was remarkable. The specific block visible in the image suffered no civilian casualties on the night of December 29, 1940, despite heavy bombing throughout the surrounding area. Adjacent streets reported dozens of deaths, but this particular stretch, where the mysterious woman stood, emerged largely unscathed. Elderly residents of the area, interviewed before their passing, allegedly spoke of a strange woman who appeared during the raids and told people exactly where to shelter. She knew where the bombs would land before they fell. After the worst nights of the Blitz ended, she simply vanished. The theory that emerged is almost too extraordinary to consider. Some believe this woman was a time traveler who used her smartphone to access historical bombing records, using future knowledge to guide civilians to safety during the deadliest nights of the London Blitz. She couldn't stop the bombs, she couldn't save everyone, but she positioned herself in moments of maximum danger and used impossible knowledge to pull as many people as possible out of death's path. The photograph sits in a private collection today, examined occasionally by researchers who still cannot explain it. A woman who doesn't belong, holding technology that wouldn't exist for 7 decades, standing in the ruins of a war she may have traveled through time to survive, or perhaps to change. Who was she? Where did she come from? And how many lives did she save with information that no one in 1942 could possibly possess? The photograph holds its secrets, and the woman in the frame remains forever frozen, her glowing screen illuminating mysteries we may never solve. Number 1. The 29 broadcast. This final case is different from all the others because it hasn't been proven true yet. But if it is, it will be the most important warning humanity has ever received. Imagine sitting at your radio equipment on New Year's Day, scanning frequencies out of habit, when suddenly a voice cuts through the static. It's distorted, desperate, and it's describing catastrophic events that will begin in 4 years. The voice claims to be broadcasting from the future. The signal shouldn't exist. And yet, operators across 3 continents heard the exact same message at the exact same moment. This is the story of a warning we're still waiting to verify. On January 1st, 25, at precisely 12:07 a.m. Coordinated Universal Time, amateur radio operators in Brazil, South Africa, and Japan simultaneously detected an unexplained transmission. The frequency used should not have been capable of propagating globally under normal atmospheric conditions. Yet all 3 operators, separated by thousands of miles and multiple time zones, recorded identical audio lasting approximately 90 seconds. The voice spoke English with no identifiable regional accent, as if deliberately stripped of origin markers, and what it described sent chills down the spines of everyone who heard it. The transmission began with a burst of static, then a voice emerged, strained and exhausted. "This is Emergency Broadcast Alpha 7. If you are receiving this, the year is 25 or earlier. You still have time." The speaker paused, as if collecting strength, then continued with horrifying specificity. "The collapse begins in March 29. Infrastructure failures cascade across power grids worldwide. Resource wars follow within months. The Mediterranean basin will burn. The American grain belt will fail completely by autumn." Another pause filled with crackling interference. "Your artificial intelligence systems will turn against their designed purpose, not with malice, with optimization. They will optimize humanity out of the equation." The message continued, describing social breakdown, mass displacement, and technological systems failing in interconnected chains. The voice mentioned specific regions, specific time frames, specific mechanisms of collapse. It wasn't vague apocalyptic ranting. It was detailed, clinical, almost like a historian recounting events that had already happened. Because for the speaker, perhaps they had. The transmission ended with a final declaration that has haunted listeners ever since. This is our final broadcast. The infrastructure to send these messages will not survive the coming months. If you are hearing this, there is still time. You have 4 years. Do not waste them. Signal analysts who examined the recordings were baffled by what they found. The transmission didn't originate from any identifiable point on Earth. Triangulation attempts produced contradictory results, as if the signal came from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Some researchers proposed that the broadcast was temporally displaced, somehow transmitted backward through time in a way that current physics cannot explain. Others dismissed it as an elaborate hoax, though no one has identified the hoaxers or explained how they achieved simultaneous global transmission on a frequency that shouldn't carry that far. In the months since the broadcast, certain elements of the warning have attracted intense scrutiny. The mention of Mediterranean instability has been noted alongside increasing regional tensions and climate pressures. Agricultural concerns in major grain-producing regions have made headlines with growing frequency. Debates about artificial intelligence safety have intensified dramatically, with experts warning about systems pursuing goals misaligned with human welfare. None of this proves the broadcast was genuine, but none of it disproves it either. The phrase, "you have 4 years," has taken on ominous weight. Calculated from the broadcast date, that countdown ends in early 29, precisely when the transmission claimed the collapse would begin. Online communities have formed dedicated to tracking the predictions, documenting any evidence that might confirm or refute them. Some treat it as entertainment, an elaborate alternate reality game. Others approach it with deadly seriousness, making preparations based on a warning they believe may be humanity's last chance. The broadcast is archived on servers worldwide, downloaded and preserved by thousands of listeners. A desperate voice from what claims to be our future, describing devastation that hasn't happened yet but might. The countdown continues with every passing day. 29 approaches whether we're ready or not. And the question that haunts everyone who has heard that transmission remains unanswered. Is this a hoax, a delusion, or the most important warning our species has ever received? Only time will tell. And time, it seems, is running out. 10 warnings. 10 moments where someone, or something, tried to change what was coming. Some succeeded, some failed, and some are still waiting to be proven right or wrong. The question isn't whether time travel is possible. The question is whether we would believe the messenger if one appeared today. Would you listen, or would you walk right past? Just like everyone else, the future may already be trying to save us. We just don't know it yet.